My name is Ben Wers. I'm a partner with Brighteye. I've been investing in EdTech since 2010, so way before it was cool. I started out my career in the US. Was fortunate to accompany some great companies there, including Nearpod and Newzella and a few others that had great success. And the insight behind Brighteye was just that a lot of the trends that were making it possible to build really interesting EdTech companies in the US were present in Europe. And so we wanted to plant a flag and really support entrepreneurs here who are taking advantage of those trends and help them particularly to internationalize in Europe and North America. And that's what we've been doing since 2017. So I feel fortunate to be doing this and really happy to have some great entrepreneurs here today to talk a little bit more about what they're doing and what's happening in the Baltic region. So I'll just let each of them introduce themselves. So Eimantas, why don't we just start with you? And if you could just tell us a little bit about yourself and what Memby is doing, and then I'll turn it over to Tönis to do the same and we'll go through some questions.
Yeah, sure. Thanks a lot for taking the time. I think this environment is great to share some knowledge with you. So yeah, Eimantas here. I'm the CEO and co-founder of First Europe's online live large class tutoring platform, Memby. And in a nutshell, our core thesis is that for us, it's all about engagement. We do supplementary teaching for K-12 students, and our thesis lies basically on two foundational aspects. The one being that we only work with top educators like star tutors, and the other is that what drives us is synchronous engagement. So with those two theses, we created the one-to-many model. We are roughly oriented to online classes which house from 20 to 200 students. And we started last year in Lithuania, and now this year with Brighteye Ventures as well as Change Ventures, we are tackling Poland and Greece.
All righty, so I guess I continue. I'm Tönis, the founder of 99 Math. I am a serial education entrepreneur, and 99 Math, in this company, we're building a math game, with the goal of getting students so excited about the game and solving math problems that they actually measurably improve their math skills. It's being used in the classrooms as a group game. Everyone plays at once and they compare their results to each other. And we're building the next phase of the game, which is being played at home. And that's how we aim to monetize. So the classroom version is free for schools, and parents have an optional premium subscription.
Great. Okay. Well, thanks to you both for being here. I think it's super interesting because honestly, both of you are tackling, I would say, a similar problem in quite different ways. And you know, I often say that the hardest part about learning something is just finding the time or taking the time to stick with it long enough that your skills actually improve. And I think for children in particular, finding motivation, the motivation to improve their academic performance can be tough. And I think you both have quite different approaches of helping students to find that motivation and boost engagement. And so I just wanted to think or to talk more about what it is about your product that actually creates that desire to stay engaged. So what's working well, and what are some of the things you tried that haven't worked at all in terms of driving that engagement? And so Tönis, why don't we start with you since you were just speaking? If you could talk a little bit more about what do you think it is about 99 Math that actually is working for students, and what have you tried that didn't work?
So what's exciting in games is the challenge. To do something hard that is hard enough to be interesting, but easy enough so you have a belief that you can actually achieve that challenge. That's what makes all sports and games challenging. If you do something that's boring for a long time, if it's too easy, then it becomes boring and it doesn't drive your engagement for the long time. If it's too hard, then you are more likely to give up really soon. So the key is, it's kind of the flow concept, to keep the person in the flow, giving them challenges that are slightly above or at the level that where they are at. So for us, what worked really well for engagement in the beginning was to get the entire classroom to compete against one another. And so you know the person that is sitting right next to, and you see in the leaderboard if you get more points or less points than him. And it's amazing how it gets the class excited. However, the same thing is not a good thing for the long-term engagement. It's only interesting for the first few games, but then you figure out who's better in math. And it doesn't make sense to keep striving for the same position. So if I know that I'm, let's say, the 15th or around that, I'm never beating my best classmates. But what we can do is have classes competing against one another, and then they form a team. And so I'm not competing with my friends in class, but against other classes in the school or in the area. And then it's the next level engagement, then it's the next goal.
Got it. No, that makes sense, and that's super interesting. And what about you, Eimantas? What have you guys seen that works in terms of engaging in people in kind of these large style classroom formats, and what hasn't worked?
Yeah. So for us, there are like two types, of learning: micro learning and let's call it like macro learning. The prolonged periods. So we are in these prolonged periods where we have to strive the engagement for let's say an hour, for an academical hour. So firstly, you have to be oriented to engaging your users, as we are in the content provision sphere, where we have to basically, where the tradition was to have this one-way train, where I'm trusting that my content is so interesting that it will lure everyone's attention and keep them focused for an hour. Instead of that, what we've done is we just aim to be engaging, and we do that by having techniques for cognitive as well as emotional engagement. I think that the cognitive engagement is pretty straightforward. In the online environment, what we feel is, and what we've learned is that frequent timings to request a feedback, to request to provide this place to do some cognitive engagement is what drives us. So like in this traditional environment, in a traditional physics or chemistry class, it is usually the case that the teacher just does talking nonstop for 20 minutes, and then there is time. Okay, now you can ask questions. Now you can solve the problems, and then the feedback starts rolling in. For us, it's a different story. We have to be engaged from the first minute, and instead of having these bigger chunks of one-way communication and then some small areas where we can have some two-way communication, we are mostly oriented into cutting the content into chunks and saying, okay, we've done only this one step, but is it clear? Okay, now we will move this number, but is it clear? And this train of engagement is what really motivates some students, because we feel that we are not in a lecture, and we feel that we can also drive some impact to the lesson, which always provides this natural feel and is also very engaging. As to emotional engagement, this is the trickier part. Cognitive engagement is pretty straightforward. It's mostly oriented to techniques, both implemented in a technical environment and in this didactional. As a didactional tactic. When it comes to emotional engagement, for us, what worked was community building. So being community centric and understanding that, okay, we are in this social learning environment, and I feel that the social part is really what worked for Tönis as well. I'm not sure if you agree, Tönis, because it is really still untapped, and only now we see some movement, which is also coming naturally from India, where we have these social learning environments, communities which are being scaled. So we are only exploring this sphere, but we feel that this really worked. And to add on what didn't work for us, so we've done, I think, like multiple tests. So we try to scale these classes to make them more highly, like to create the content in a more higher quality, and to have to scale the lesson, the number of participants as well, and making it slightly a bit of a lecture. So what we've tested is just an event where we, like, for 3 days done this workshop where we were providing like massive content, massive value for free for everyone, and just to see this concept overall, like how high quality, like this Indian model, you know, of high quality, amazing environment dedicated for way bigger masses than usual. So this for us really, because it took off the engagement, it is a different story. To engage the students in that environment, it took off the engagement, and we saw really that this didn't work for us at least.
Okay, no, that's interesting. So it's actually you do need to tap into the kind of the social dynamic or the interactive dynamic in order to make it work. And that, I guess that Tönis, you're right. Tönis was saying the same thing, just in a different way. Is that ultimately there needs to be some kind of particularly for younger kids, it makes sense. There needs to be some kind of sense of that you're in it together. otherwise, it's hard to keep going.
And basically to explore where your size of the group, which you're which you're trying to engage, somewhere lies the sweet spot in there.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, and India, actually, just as an anecdote, I was talking to somebody there who mentioned that her kids have been sort of being homeschooled for 580 days in a row, so because of COVID. So I think that what's happening there is unsurprising to see a lot of changes happening during such a long period of disruption. But okay, cool. So I just wanted to touch a little bit also on internationalization. That's obviously a big theme for us. And I know both of you are being distributed internationally. Do you see students' behavior differing much from country to country? Is there stuff that you've had to do to adjust the product as you expand across markets? Eimantas, why don't we start with you, since we were just speaking, and then I'll turn it over to Tönis.
Yeah, sure. So just to give a sense, we launched I think 5 weeks ago. So we are still in this entrance, phase where we are still exploring like what works best for them. So we are still trying to work it out ourselves, to understand. What we learned from Lithuania firstly is that I think it could be used all throughout the Baltics. Is that students in the Baltics are hungry for change. Even teachers at school are advocating new solutions, new things to try. And what that does is basically it removes this, it at least lowers the friction of entrance. They are more keen to try not fully polished solutions. So that was what we learned for Lithuanians. So we are great early adopters. When it comes to Poland, what we learned is that we are a bit more conservative. We want to wait. We need that social proof. We are, in a sense, similar to Lithuanians when it comes to content consumption. So I think that content consumption could be similar all throughout the Eastern region. And for Greeks, what we learned is that we are extremely heavy education consumers. Let's call it that way. How we measure that is, of course, one way is to measure the time spent. But for us, what was a great indicator that let's say if in Lithuania it is usual to have like 1.8 lessons per week. Like it can be maths or physics or both maths. But in Poland it was a similar case, but in Greece it is twice as high. So this is a new thing for us to understand that okay, the product has to have the infrastructure has to be a bit amended, improved, so that the Greeks could fill their needs, satisfy their needs in a bit different way than say Poles or Lithuanians.
Cool. Well, that's super interesting and good to know. Yeah, that's true. If people have questions, feel free to drop them in the chat, and I'll try to integrate them into the conversation. Tönis, what about you? What have you found as you've expanded 99 Math across borders?
So we've tried that for a while, and we have quite a lot of learning points, which all lead to the similar conclusions, which is there's not a whole lot of difference for 99 Math. It does similarly in all of the countries. So when we started expanding out from Estonia, we initially targeted European countries and a little bit of US, and then we thought maybe Latin America is the thing, so we went there. And then we figured, okay, that's too many countries to focus on at the same time, and we focused only on the States. Now, our user base in the United States is 3 times larger than everything else combined, all other countries combined. But if we do look into the user behavior, then it's very similar, and the teachers' work, I guess, is very similar in a sense that they need to teach one skill after another. So you do multiplication by 5, and then you move on to multiplication by 6, and guess what's next? So since the curriculum, the math curriculum, is universal, there's such small changes from country to country. From day one, we built this math program in our platform to be adaptable for any curriculum in the world, and so we didn't want to build any lock-in with some specific national curriculum and enabling it to grow internationally. That's exactly what we see happening today. Although we are focused on the US, expanding that market, because frankly, we don't have the attention span for anything else at the moment. But we see all other countries behaving and growing in a similar manner, and eventually we do intend to scale that to as many countries as possible, because math is the same in all the countries.
That's great. That's super. It's super interesting to hear. I think and it's unsurprising. I mean, I think for European companies, there tends to be 2 trajectories. It's either Europe first, and we're going to expand across Europe, or we're going to do one country in Europe and then we're going to focus on the US. You know, depending on traction and a number of other factors, you know, either formula works. I guess eventually I would expect companies to jump from Europe to Asia, but we haven't seen too much of that. In terms of month to month, Tönis, what do you look at as the single most important KPI? I guess focusing specifically on the US. I mean, what is it that you're looking at there to make sure that you're doing the right things, that things are progressing in the way you want them to? What adjustments have you made, if any, to sort of move the needle on kind of your key metrics?
So our North Star metric is play times. Each time a kid plays a game, that's when we are delivering value. So that's what we measure, the total play times, regardless if it's triggered by the teacher in the classroom or the kid is playing at home. That's all play times.
Okay.
We are focusing, however, more on the teacher-driven gates because our phase now is the market uptake in the States. And so the key user metric that we're looking at is weekly active teachers. So we know that our product is useful for them really when they are using it week after week. So we have some occasional users that play a few days per month, but really they have new math skills to teach every week. And so weekly active teachers is the core metric. And now everything else comes from the perspective of how can we affect that? What's the user acquisition number? What's the activation rate? How many signups do we actually get to playing the first game? Yeah. Then the retention. And because we're taking a product-led growth approach, then referrals at the final part is super important for us, and we're looking for all kinds of ways to move these metrics, like per teacher referrals, the total number of referrals. So the entire funnel approach with all those phases, which contribute to weekly active teachers.
Okay, that's super helpful, and I think good for other folks to understand as well. Eimantas, hopefully you're back on. We'd love to hear for you what's kind of key KPI for you, and what have you guys been doing to sort of affect that?
Yeah. Well, as we are still like extremely growth, oriented, so I feel that at the end of the day, everything what matters is the monthly revenue. So, of course, like different cases require different North Stars. So, talking business-wise, it's the MRR. But what I feel really impacted our mindset and extremely helped to focus for the team is to understand that there is a path to that revenue, and you can impact that path all throughout the way. So, so what we've done is basically we just created this customer flow, and for each country we pick one focus area to one place to focus. So, for instance, let's say if you're entering the market, like what we need essentially is to drive the first users to these live lessons. So activation is the key. In Lithuania, where we have already been there, like present for over a year, it's a different story. We are more focusing on participation, how we can impact that, and so behind the participation lies time spent, engagement rate, all that beautiful stuff, and basically we are trying to work from the beginning up to the revenue, only focusing on one step per country.
Okay, that makes sense. Just in the interest of time, I have kind of two short questions that I'm going to ask, and then we're going to turn it over to the VCs to talk about investment in the region. But one came from the audience, and it says, I think it's interesting in terms of expansions and user feedback. How much do parents factor in to your assessment of product and market fit? And I guess and have you encountered any differences in mindsets of parents across various countries? I guess I would also just tweak that a bit and say, are you ultimately trying to convince parents or students? And then how does that change as you go across countries? I'll ask you first, and then I'll turn it over to them.
Sure.
Yeah.
For us, our brand has always been focusing around the students, although the decision makers are the parents. But we feel that if we'll make the student want to join us, no parent will ever block that decision, especially if it's affordable.
Yeah. Okay. What about you, Tönis? Are you focused on parents' reactions? Is there any changes there across in the US versus other places?
Yeah, I'd say it's different here. Although the teachers' work is pretty similar from country to country, then it's the parents' behavior as the consumer behavior is fairly different from, for example, their paying readiness. US parents are more willing and more kind of used to pay a price for the products they're using. In Latin America, they're not so keen on paying always. So that's going to be different from country to country. But in both cases, the way for us to get to parent is the student asking their mom for money for this game. And the way we try to position is that, okay, here's the thing, mom, your kid is going to play games anyways. Do you want them to play like some random game, or do you want them to actually get better in math while they're playing? And with that argument, we hope to convert parents in all the countries.
Okay, got it. Okay, in the interest of time, I'm just going to ask you one final question, and then there's one additional question from the audience that I'll just ask you to answer in the chat, if you guys don't mind, once we stop speaking. But I'm assuming that a fair amount of the people participating today are entrepreneurs who are looking to build companies in edtech. And so if there was one specific piece of advice that you would have for another entrepreneur looking to do that, Tönis, what would it be?
So I pondered about this for a long time as well, and the model that I see enabling the fastest growth is a B2C approach targeting teachers. That's what Kahoot also did. They made a product that was so simple to adopt and got an immediate emotional positive reaction, and that triggered a wave of word of mouth marketing after the first trying of the game. And anything selling to schools is going to be very long sales cycles, and the fiscal year and the school year, and it's fairly slow. But teacher adoption, you can target them via social media, organic social media, and many other founders that we have talked to that are growing immensely fast in the US market are using exactly the same strategy, targeting teachers on social media and word of mouth growth after the first experience.
Okay, that's super interesting, and I think that's good advice for the US market in particular. What about you, Eimantas? What advice would you give for folks?
Yeah, for us, what worked is just keeping it simple. I see a lot of mistakes being done in the early stage when you feel that you have this core idea and it just can't be presented in an ugly, nasty, lean environment. It has to be like all polished before the launch. So I feel that going back to the foundation is important. So if you're launching, try to grasp in one sentence what exactly are you trying to do, what is your sole functionality, and just do only that and add to that.
Great. Okay. Well, I think that's good advice. I'm sorry that we don't have more time to talk to you both, but I really appreciate you both contributing your thoughts here. I'm sure other folks do as well. There's one additional question from the audience, which I'll ask Hege to just post in the chat, and then maybe you can reply on via chat to with whatever your opinions are. Sure. Okay, great.
Thanks a lot for having us.
Thank you. Oh, great. Okay, so hi, Gabby and Kai. Thanks to you both also for doing this. I'll just start by asking you to just introduce yourself and your fund. Gabby, why don't we start with you?
Of course. Hi, everyone. So my name is Gabriela, and I represent Change Ventures today. So Change Ventures, we're a pan-Baltic pre-seed and seed fund. So actually, both of our portfolio companies just spoke. So 99 Month and Memby. So what sort of like separates us, or like, why we stand out from other funds that invest throughout the Baltics, is the fact that we have people in all 3 Baltic countries. So there are 2 partners based in Tallinn, Estonia, 1 partner in Riga, Latvia, and I'm based in Lithuania, Vilnius. So yeah, as I said, we do tickets from 400K up to 2 million usually. So we're a generalist investor. And as I said, we do EdTech, some FinTech, some climate tech. We both B2B, B2C companies. So I think it's always easier to say what we don't invest in. So we usually avoid biotechnology, medical tech, very super like deep techy stuff, gaming, crypto, etc. Yeah, so I think what else about our fund? So we're on our 2nd fund. So we kicked it off in 2019. By now, I'd say it's still the majority of our portfolio companies come from Estonia. So I'd say like the distribution is around 70-80% still Estonian companies. The rest is Lithuania, and still a couple of few in Latvia as well. Yeah, we just did our 2nd close, so it's still unannounced. So wait for the news. But yeah, that's sort of us in a nutshell, Change Ventures.
Great. No, thanks for that, and congrats on the 2nd close. Which sometimes founders aren't quite aware that there's a good portion of investors' time that is also spent raising money. So we do develop empathy by doing that. So Kai, what about you? Tell us a little bit more about yourself and Sparkmind.
Yeah. Hi everyone. Pleasure to be here. So yeah, shortly on my professional background. So I've spent around 8 years with tech startups here in Finland first, and then a couple of years of management consulting for listed companies. And then prior to Sparkmind, I was spending almost 8 years at Sanoma Learning, which is the biggest educational publisher or K-12 publisher in Europe. So I was leading strategy and M&A and being part of Sanoma Ventures team of Sanoma Learning. And yeah, I mean, we set up Sparkmind about 3 years ago. 100% EdTech focused. We're running a 55 million fund. We've been investing for a year and a half, almost 2 years now. We've done around 10 investments. Typical ticket size from 500,000 to 3 million. We tend to focus on Europe and I would say Northern Europe, Central Europe. But then we do have a couple of satellites. So Singapore, Hong Kong, and Australia are actually kind of satellites for us, where we see quite a bit of deal flow coming in. We do nothing else but EdTech. But for us, learning is we approach it pretty broadly. So from early childhood to lifelong learning and everything in between. So higher ed, K-12, all of it. As long as you are producing learning out or improving learning outcomes, increasing access, providing better efficiency for processes or actionable data, we're interested. So that's in a nutshell, Sparkmind. Ben, I think you're on mute again.
Sorry about that. It's just the instinct is to put yourself on mute. You can't take yourself off. Okay, so apologies, but thanks for bearing with us. Yeah, so I just wanted to ask both of you a little bit more specifically about EdTech and how you've seen that evolve. I guess in the Baltics or more generally, if it makes more sense in the region over the last 3 or 4 years. And so Kai, it'd be good to get your perspective. Obviously, you came to this from a corporate setting, and now you're in it as an investor. But you've had a long history of looking at this. I mean, what do you think the key sort of evolutions are in the last 3 or 4 years? And if you have any observations specifically about the Baltics, that would be super interesting as well.
I mean, if I would go 5 years back or even a bit more, I would say the quality of themes has improved. I mean, significantly. The depth of understanding of pedagogy has skyrocketed. Teams 5 years ago, 6 years ago, they were pretty good with tech and some commercial understanding, but the pedagogical side was just not there yet. I mean, typically. I think the area is the region is moving super fast forwards. We see highly skillful global mindset entrepreneurs coming out and in actually punching way above their weight class, so to say. I mean, if you think of the Baltics in terms of number of people, for example, and the number of edtechs we see coming from there, it's just pretty amazing. So good work there. Okay, awesome. Gabby, what do you see?
I think I can just second what Kai has said. I think it's just the whole startup ecosystem, and I think also the venture capital ecosystem has been booming throughout the last years. And I mean, recently the Deal Room report came out that said, Baltics is only housed I think 6% of the whole Central and Eastern European region population, but it has houses 4 out of the 10 most valuable companies in the whole region. And I mean, yeah, Estonia is the first country in the world for per capita, has the most startups per capita, also has fundraised the most per capita. Lithuania, I think, is 4th. Latvia is the 3rd out of the CE region. So I mean, yeah, it's been I think a fantastic time for the Baltics. And I mean, of course, I think with regards to EdTech, I mean, we have been seeing new companies popping up now. But I think it's still somewhat maybe perhaps a tiny bit slower than the other sectors, such as I would say, such as fintech, maybe more life sciences, biotech. But I feel like EdTech is also I think slowly will start to catch up on with also the European sort of standard. That's my mindset.
Cool. And I have to ask you then about valuations, because often, the good news about increased momentum is that there's more capital to be had. As Rhys showed, there's not actually, it depends on whether there's actually more deals done. What we've seen in EdTech is that actually the number of deals done hasn't changed that much. It's just the amount of capital available for stronger companies is much, much bigger. And what that means is valuations also get impacted ultimately. And so I don't know, what have you guys seen in terms of valuations and how that's changed at the at the early stage, which is where we all sort of mostly invest? Gabby, I'll start with you. Sorry. Since I was talking, and then I'll go. Yeah.
Yeah. Should I go? Okay. Yeah. I think I think the Baltics also follow the sort of the similar European trends. So the valuations have been increasing, I think, quite significantly. And I think, but Rhys has also covered it partly in a sense that I think. So we actually, some self-promo also what Rhys already mentioned. So Change Ventures do this sort of Baltic deal report where we gather all the data about all the deals that happen in the region, and then we publish it. So we gather data on revenues, valuations, round size, investors. So I think what we also seen is that exactly revenue importance, revenues have dropped. So people raise now with having just from a slide deck, pitch deck, without having any traction, any revenues, and then but the valuations have been quite steep in increase. So I think, yeah, the median I think for seed is 8.5 million. I think what we found in our report, and then for pre-seed is around 3.5 million, I believe. But Kai, I think maybe you'll have more to add to this.
I mean, we've stopped altogether talking about, Preseed Seed A, because we get so confused between, say US and European market, because we rather talk about the amount of money being invested. We do see increase in valuations, but I think at the same time we do see increasing quality of the cases. So I think the companies are just better. They are moving faster. Yes, they might lack traction, but then again we see companies reaching product relevancy and product market fit probably faster. So that's definitely something positive. We don't feel anxious about it at all. If there is one thing that we see across Europe or even on a global scale, is that EdTech has this tendency to attract early angel investors who come in for the love of the sport. And they might not always recognize that if they pump up the valuation or giving the money in, with pretty high valuation, that might create problems later for the later round. So, and if I were to name a few countries, then it would probably be Sweden and Norway where we see this the most. But Baltics, we haven't seen too many cases like this yet.
Yeah. No, I agree that can be really problematic if you screw up your cap table too badly at the beginning. It requires a lot of work to get out of. And so yeah, this is good advice for folks to watch out for. In terms of predictions, Kai, for the next kind of 1 to 2 years, let's say, in the EdTech space, in the Baltics or more generally in Europe, I mean, what are your predictions? What do you see as sort of emerging?
Oh, it's a big question. I think, if I start with the Baltics, I expect the ecosystem to keep on developing very favorably. I see no reason for that, not to go that way. I think in general, the EdTech will enjoy huge trade wins. We do see the B2C market picking up quite nicely. I think one of the things that might help with K-12 side of things is the product-led growth and bottom-up growth, and we finally start to realize that the teachers are just kind of being buried with EdTech pushed top down, and we start to see more and more products growing kind of bottom up. So I think that is definitely something we will see continuing, and the B2C side will go on growing. Also, I would say corporate training will have a huge upward swing, and I think community-driven learning, mentoring, student experience, and well-being would be the kind of areas where I would expect to see quite a swing upwards, and these are a few of the areas that we are definitely interested in.
Okay, that's helpful to understand. And obviously just to editorialize here a bit, I think that the big change in the US market came when you had a sufficient level of digital penetration in schools, where you could have more of a bottom-up motion where teachers would adopt products themselves because they had their own devices, because there was actually broadband in the classroom, and then you could use teacher adoption to sell to schools in a way that really shortened sales cycles. And so I think companies like Kahoot! Is no accident, comes out of Norway, for example, where there was high digital penetration in schools to begin with, and so you could have that idea and go with it. And the higher digital penetration there is in the Baltics, I would expect the more of those kinds of ideas come out. So sorry, that was my editorial addition, but thanks for that. And then Gabby, what about you? Do you have any predictions for how EdTech evolves in the region for the next 2 years or so?
Yeah, so my guess would be, I feel like, Kai brought up a lot of really good points, and I think I was also sort of thinking in the same manner. But I feel like, what we saw, that we witnessed is the pandemic actually opened a lot of doors with regards to education, and this moving towards democratization of education. Whether you talk about tutoring platforms, what Memby does, for instance, what Eimantas spoke about, the fact that you make tutoring much more accessible to the wider audience of students. You can actually access, these star tutors from anywhere around the world. So you're no longer limited to your physical proximity. So we see that a lot. Then another thing that I feel like also what Kai has already mentioned, that I feel like I really like the trend that we're going towards more like, taking care of the well-being of like, whether be it employees, so like B2B and like corporate well-being, or, of the students. Then community first products, to fight this loneliness of K-12 students, studying by themselves, to form these sort of like groups, TikToks for learners, etc. And then I think one other thing that I'm pretty also interested in, I see it popping up also in the Baltics, is that these social emotional learning platforms, that to develop your soft skills, and then how can you train the students, and then maybe that how also could those platforms be used for sort of like more well-rounded student assessment. So for instance, that we're also start to witness that, it's no longer enough to just value students based on like the grades that they receive or the SATs or whatever. Like we need to find like a more well-rounded approach. So I think I'm also very interested to see how these new findings are going to be incorporated in sort of like the student assessment, and how, how they going to be valued or accepted to universities further, or to introduce to the work market. Yeah, so these would be my sort of main predictions, I think.
Gabriel, if I may build on that, I mean, if we look at the US market, and Ben, please, add to this, but the amount of money Biden is pouring into the market, it's just, from European perspective, it's a ridiculous amount of money. And, if you would look at the, top topic that they expect the schools to burn the money on, it's actually school well-being. So this is something that we see, feel very strongly about, and I believe there will be a huge shift in that.
Yeah, no, I think that's smart. I will say, I mean, here's my old man crankiness coming into play, but I having done this for a while, I think that, I mean, at the end of the day, I think social emotional awareness is super helpful. I think at the end of the day, though, a lot of what people are talking about when it comes to learning in particular is really engagement. It's really getting people to feel connected, right? And so I think not that you can solve all problems with one tool, but I think if we can find a way to actually excite people, or excite kids in particular, about learning, then I think the social emotional stuff becomes not quite as dire as it is in a scenario where we're all just coming out of COVID and nobody knows what the heck is going on. And so I would love to see solutions around both, but I think if I had to choose one, I would say usually the particularly for younger demographics, but in general for all learning products that we look at, one of the key criteria for us is just how excited are people to actually use the product, right? And how and does it really drive motivation? Like, this is not an original thought, by the way. If you look at OutSchool, which just raised their at a $3.5 billion valuation, their key metric is love of learning, right? Like that's kind of what I don't know how they measure that, but apparently that's their North Star. And so I think that's what we look for. I'll this is an open question because we only have a couple minutes left for either Gabby or Kai. Is there anything that you're particularly looking for? If there's one, is there one kind of company that you guys are looking for that you would love to see somebody build that you haven't seen yet?
Good question.
It's a very good question. not a super easy one to. I mean, yeah, on broader scale of things, I would say this boils down pretty much, Ben, to your point on engagement. So for online learning, the sense of belonging, engagement, how to create meaningful practices on scale for that. And I think that's what tutoring market is today all about, right? So I think that is, and I don't expect to see one formula for this, but just that's something I'm super curious about.
Yeah, okay. I think I can only second to what Kai or Ben said. Is that I feel like you've drawn upon a very good point. How do you measure this, like, let's say, love or engagement for learning? And then another thing that I feel like to find ways or tools, maybe how to measure this, if I'm pronouncing it right, impact, like finding the right ways or tools to do that and somehow, sort of like make it more tangible. So I think that this would be an interesting direction to look at.
Yeah. Okay, and just to answer my own question, since we have 1 or 2 minutes left, I'm pushing myself here. But I mean, I think this is not so much this is maybe a dodge to the question, but this is not so much a problem that I would like solve, but an approach that I'm really interested in. So I used to think that there were sort of 2 ways you could approach any problem. One was very automated, like AI driven, just finding a way to drive content in a personalized, relevant manner to folks. And then the other was to create, a really hyper engaging social experience. And so, if you could think about that as like the automated sort of experience would be more learning per hour, and the social experience would be more hours of learning, right? Like you're optimizing for different things. And I think actually increasingly you can try to do both, or you can at least try to do something that's at the intersection of those 2 trends. And you don't necessarily have to build for that from the beginning. Like you can use a lot of traction from either automation or from social to build the thing that you don't have yet. And so what I'm interested in generally is an approach that looks to marry a bit of the 2, because I think it's increasingly possible to do at an earlier stage where it wasn't like it was just too expensive to do it before. And so yeah, I think that I'll just leave it there. There's someone in the audience who's asking, have you seen good online solutions to improve the well-being of students? I haven't seen any, honestly, but I will open that up to Kai and Gabby. Have you guys seen anything that's interesting on that side?
Well, I mean, I have to say, of course, School Day, one of our portfolio companies, but it starts with measuring. So it's all about first getting the bottom line. So they have this model for, university developed research-based model for well-being, and then you basically measure, gather feedback from the students, you get the baseline, and then there is very kind of detailed, easy to follow lesson plans on how to react on the findings, how to interact with the classroom, how to explain the phenomenon we are looking at, and how we could, as a group, as a classroom, improve on that. So I think as a concept, it's super interesting.
Okay, Gabby, anything you've seen?
No, I actually haven't seen much. I only saw like more for a focus on like corporates or like companies, but nothing for students so far.
Okay. So there's still some open space there, which is good to know for entrepreneurs in the world. So thanks, guys. We're at time. I really appreciate both your time, or everybody who participated in the panel, as well as everybody who was in the audience. Thanks so much for doing this. Please feel free to reach out to us, and we'll keep the conversation going.
Thank you so much.
Brilliant.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Ben. And just echoing that, thanks to all of you who have joined. I hope you've enjoyed it. And at Brighteye, we still haven't had enough of exploring. So next month on Thursday, the 18th of November, we'll head south and visit Italy. Follow us on LinkedIn and Twitter, please, for the details, and we'll update you on there. And also, if you're planning to be at Excited and Slush in Helsinki at the end of November, early December, we'll be there. So we'd like to meet you there for real. For now, thanks again, and we'll catch you soon. Bye, everyone. Thanks.